Good. Good. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The South Dakota Senate will come to order, and welcome back, and thankfully you had safe travels. Leading us in our prayer today, we welcome back Reverend Dan Bader of the First United Methodist Church here in Pierre. And we have a new group of pages for the next 2 weeks. And the first one, who is our page of the day, is Daniel Burkhalter from Prairie City, who will be leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Will you pray with me? O God, we lift up those who fill these Senate chambers, seeking to do the hard work that serves the greater good of all people and for the state of South Dakota. We pray that hearts and minds would be continually seeking vision and wisdom to do what is right and just. We pray that each person would set aside personal motivations and desires and seek to work with each other in order to best utilize our resources to protect, care for, and enrich in the lives of all people. Those who visit, those who do business here, those who make their livelihood in this state, and those who claim this state as their home. We pray for guidance, discernment, and heartfelt care in the work that is being done and that which is yet to be done. We offer our prayers to you, O God. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Secretary, call the roll, please.
Senator Boland, Kamak, Cronin, Kurd, Ewing, Frerichs, Greenfield, Haverly, Heiner, Jensen, Kennedy, Killer, Klum, Kolbeck, Langer, Maher, Monroe, Nelson, Neseba, Netherton, Norstrup, Otten, Partridge, Peters, Rush, Russell, Soholt, Solano, Stalzer, Sutton, Tapio, Tiedemann, White, Wick, and Youngberg. We have a quorum, Mr. President.
Approval of the journal.
Mr. President, the Committee on Legislative Procedure respectfully reports that the Secretary of the Senate has had under consideration the Senate Journal of the 8th day. All errors, typographical or otherwise, are duly marked in the temporary journal for correction, and we hereby move the adoption of the report. Senator Greenfield, Chair.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carried. Well, thank you very much for everybody being here, and especially those who are watching, and most especially thank South Dakota Public Broadcasting for being able to broadcast this out, and that especially in the southeastern and eastern part of our states, people are keeping safe, and Department of Public Safety and all those folks through the Department of Transportation has been very busy in closing the interstate, and we're very grateful for you keeping us safe. A couple of quick announcements or highlights here before we get this week going. Saturday was Josh Klum's birthday, and then coming this Friday is Jack Colbeck's birthday. So there's, so you're only a week apart in age. Yeah, that's just amazing. So we wish you both happy birthdays, since we're not going to be in session or weren't in all of those. So happy birthday. No need to bring treats, though, if you wish. So personal privilege, Jack. Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just also want you pages and the members of the Senate to know that it is my wife's birthday the same day as mine on Friday, and she's not as old as I am either.
That's good. We'll never tell her that. Okay, we're going to also, now we need to swear in our pages that are just starting for 2 weeks. So all of the pages, if you'll come up here, I know you've been told you have your oaths. We'll come right down here. I'll be right there. Okay, next point of business is communications and petitions. Thank you.
I have 2 letters from Governor Dennis Dugard, and it is one letter is to reappoint Myron Williams of Wall to the State Brand Board, and the second letter is to reappoint Bart Blum of Reliance to the State Brand Board.
Both these appointments are being referred to the Committee on Agriculture and Natural Resources for hearing. Now we're on to reports of standing committees. These are reports on what happened today in our committees.
Mr. President, the Committee on Transportation reports that it has had under consideration Senate Bills 59 and 82 recommends due pass, and House Bill 1068 recommending due pass to be placed on the consent calendar. Senator Stalzer, Vice Chair. The Committee on Local Government has had under consideration Senate Bill 68 and 88 recommends due pass to be placed on the consent calendar. Senator Langer, Chair. Committee on Taxation has had under consideration House Bills 1048 and 1049 and recommends due pass to be placed on the consent calendar. Senator Frerichs, Acting Chair. Committee on State Affairs has had under consideration Senate Bill 79 and SJR number 1 recommends due pass. Senate Bill 77 recommends due pass as amended and recommends deferring Senate Bill 85 to the 41st legislative day. Senator Ewing, Chair. And the Committee on Health and Human Services has had under consideration Senate Bill 74 recommends due pass, Senate Bill 75 due pass to be placed on the consent calendar, and Senate Bills 30 and Senate Bill 71 and they're amended and then to be placed on the consent calendar. Senator Soholt, Chair.
Busy committees. Now we're on to our next order of businesses, which is messages, please.
Mr. President, I have the honor to return SCR 1, in which the House has concurred, and I have the honor to transmit House Bills 1011, 1013, 1014, 1015, 1030, 1039, 1040, 1046, and 1047, which have passed the House, and your favorable consideration is requested. Sandra J. Zinter, Chief Clerk.
Okay, our next order of business is motions and resolutions. These actual motions have to do with resolutions, and they're debatable. They do not have the force and effect of law if approved, but they are subject to debate and discussion. So please proceed with resolutions.
Senate Concurrent Resolution Number 2, a concurrent resolution endorsing the right-to-work provisions in the South Dakota Constitution and in the Labor Management Relations Act that prohibit forced union membership. Senator Boland moves that SCR 2, as found on page 132 of the Senate Journal, be adopted.
Comments on the motion? Good afternoon, Senator Boland. Good to see you, sir.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Fellow members, I bring to you today Senate Concurrent Resolution Number 2, a statement supporting Article 5, Section 2 of the South Dakota Constitution and the Labor Management Relations Act of 1947. This section is better known as the right-to-work provision of our Constitution. It was passed by the people in the mid-1940s at a time in our history when labor strife was a dominant factor of economic life in our society. Immediately after World War II, strikes and labor stoppages became very common in the country, and violence accompanied some of these labor disputes. Some in the Congress sought a change. Senator Robert Taft of Ohio and Representative Fred Hartley of New Jersey sponsored a bill that would amend the National Labor Relations Acts of the 1930s. One key component of the bill was Section 14B, which forbade the closed shop and allowed states to outlaw the union shop, one which required workers to join unions shortly after they began working. It was passed by an overwhelming bipartisan majority of both houses of Congress, 308 to 107 in the House and 68 to 24 in the Senate in 1947, with a strong majority of both parties supporting it. It was vetoed by President Truman, but his veto was decisively overturned. All members of the South Dakota delegation to the House and Senate voted for this measure, and I would like to add that in the 1960s, when an effort was made to repeal the provision and eliminate the right-to-work aspect of the law, again, all the members of the South Dakota delegation, including Senator George McGovern, resisted efforts to change the law, and their actions were successful. In fact, I have a quote that I gleaned from Senator McGovern in a letter that he wrote to the National Right to Work Committee in 1968, and his quote was from Senator George McGovern, "As you know from my vote in 1966, I favor retention of Section 14B of the Taft-Hartley Act." Our constitutional provision in South Dakota solidifies our support of this concept, although other states only make their support of the right-to-work concept a part of their regular laws and not a part of the Constitution. The Taft-Hartley Act is a classic bipartisan action of the Congress, and it shows that in times past, party affiliation was not as strong as it seems today. Again, the majorities of both parties in the U.S. Congress in 1947 supported the override of the Truman veto. That would perhaps be nearly impossible in today's political climate. The right-to-work concept is important to our state, and I urge support of this resolution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Further remarks? Senator Van Heinert. Matakipi. How?
Goedemiddag, Mr. President.
When
For
we
those
go
of you who
out-
don't know, that's Dutch for good afternoon.
No, we wouldn't know. Matakipi, how?
Question for the prime sponsor.
State your question, please.
Senator, if this is already in statute in South Dakota, why do we need this resolution?
Senator Boland, do you wish to answer
Yes,
the question, sir?
I want to thank you very much for the question. The reason that I brought this was that this was an example of an override of a presidential veto that was sponsored, that was carried out by a strong bipartisan majority of both political parties in the Congress. It shows the independence of Congress. It was not done in a partisan way. It was done in a bipartisan manner. And I think that in our Congress today, this could be a lesson for us to learn from. So the bipartisanship of this measure is what attracted me to it, and that's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Heiner, you have the floor.
A follow-up, I guess. I mean,
sir.
is this an issue in South Dakota right now? Are we forcing members to, or people employed to, are we forcing them to join unions?
Senator Boland, do you wish to answer any one of those 4 questions?
Very briefly, no, but it's part of the reason for that, or I would say a very strong reason for that, is the passage of this bill and the provisions of the South Dakota Constitution.
Thank you, sir. Senator Heiner, you still have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I guess I rise in opposition to this. I don't believe this is an issue in South Dakota right now. We already have this in statute. I mean, you know, the speed limit on the interstate is 80 miles an hour for the most part. Are we going to bring a resolution, you know, reaffirming that? It's just, I don't think this is an issue in South Dakota. It's probably not needed at this time. Kilame Apolo. I don't know how to say it in Dutch, so sorry.
Those shoes were made for walking. Senator Nesseman.
Mr. President, I rise in opposition to this resolution, to the friend and the good senator from Canton. Right to work, I think, is misnamed. It's really a name for a policy designed to take away South Dakotans' right to organize and collectively bargain for better working conditions. I think those behind right-to-work laws claim that these laws protect workers from being forced to join a union, but that's not true, right? Federal law already mandates no worker can be forced to become a union member or to provide any monetary support to a political cause that they do not believe in. That's taken care of at the federal level. In reality, what right-to-work laws do is they tilt the balance of power toward big corporations. They further rig the system at expense of working families, and these laws make it more difficult for working people to form unions and to collectively bargain for better wages, benefits, and working conditions. Now, while these measures are framed in terms of workers' rights, it has nothing to do with the right to work, right? It means that non-union dues-paying members demand the right to be represented by a union and to not pay for it. That's the main essential part of right to work, is that there are union dues-paying members that are now being forced, even if you're a non-member of the union has to represent you if there is a grievance or a conflict. And so what it does is it creates a free rider position for non-union members who benefit from the collective bargaining of their dues-paying members. Now, if according to Gould and Kimball, 2015, workers in right-to-work states make an average of $1,558 less than their counterparts in non-right-to-work states. If you think about that, if you take that $1,500 per person of all the workers in the state, and South Dakota has 417,520 workers as of May, if you just take that $1,500, take that times 400,000 workers, that would be $600 million in additional wages. Again, 400,000 times 1,500 would be $600 million in additional wages. If those workers went out and spent that, and we taxed it at 4.5%, you'd have $27 million more in revenue. And two of the things we keep talking about in this state Senate and on the other side in the House, we keep talking about workforce development and we keep talking about shortages in our budget. And it's possible that both of these are related to right to work. Because if we didn't have right to work laws, some of our best skilled tradespeople wouldn't be going across the border or going to other states, and they'd be staying here and doing that work here in South Dakota. And if they were staying here and we were making more money, we'd have $27 million more in revenue coming in. Note, that's almost enough to close our 2018 fiscal year gap. So I'd urge you to vote against this and to work on real legislation instead of a fake resolution. Let's figure out how to do workforce development in this state that benefits everybody, including the workers in this state. That's what we need to do, is we need to create an environment for workers that attract and retain them and get them to stay here, right here in the best state in the union, South Dakota. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Further remarks? Senator Sutton, good afternoon, sir.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to be taking a little different approach than a couple of my colleagues. I'm going to support this resolution today because of my support of the South Dakota Constitution and the will of the people of our state. This bill is about forced union membership, but our focus should also be on guaranteeing the rights of workers to organize. My support of this resolution should not be construed as opposing the fundamental rights of workers to organize, and the right of the worker to organize must be protected. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Sutton. Further remarks? Hearing none, the question before the Senate then is Senator Boland's motion that SCR 2 be adopted. Those in favor of adopting the resolution will vote aye. Those opposed to adoption will vote no. Madam Secretary, call the roll, please.
Senator Boland? Aye. Kamak? Excused. Cronin? Aye. Kurd? Aye. Ewing? Aye. Frerichs? No. Greenfield? Aye. Haverly? Aye. Heinert? No. Jensen? Aye. Kennedy? No. Killer? No. Klum? Aye. Colbeck? Aye. Langer? Aye. Maher? Aye. Monroe? Aye. Nelson? Aye. Nesseba? No. Netherton? Aye. Norstrup? Aye. Otten? Aye. Partridge is excused. Peters? Aye. Rush? Aye. Russell? Aye. Sohold? Aye. Solano? Aye. Stalzer? Aye. Sutton? Aye. Tapio? Aye. Tiedemann? Aye. White? Aye. Wick? Aye. Youngberg? Mr. President, there are 28 yeas, 5 nays, and 2 excused.
Thank you, Senator Boland's motion that SCR 2 be adopted, having received a majority vote of the members elect, is hereby declared passed and so adopted. I'd like to thank Gage Anderson and Max Anderson for bringing your sister with you today, Rowan. I know she had to step out for a little bit, and Mom and Dad too. Jack and Kim Anderson here are from Lemon, and I think a number of them know them and their relationship to people within state government. So thank you for being here, and especially Gage and Max for bringing your sister. Always take care of your little sister, right? Okay. We love Lemon because, why? Petrified forest, right? Okay, thank you for being here. Here we go.
Senate Concurrent Resolution Number 3, a concurrent resolution committing the legislature and urging the governor, the Supreme Court, and the Attorney General to secure the blessings of life and liberty for South Dakota's posterity. Senator Nelson moves that SCR 3, as found on page 151 of the Senate Journal, be adopted.
Comments on that motion? Senator Nelson, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you. I wish to start off my speech with, oftentimes we hear politicians making light of the work we do up here, such as stating concurrent resolutions don't matter, that they're fake. If your word means nothing, if your resolution means nothing, then I would have to agree. But I would remind this illustrious body, and I would remind our pages and our high school students at home, that if not for the courage and the resolute of our founding fathers in the document that inspired and incited us to become a nation, not the Declaration of Independence, but the Lee Resolution that precipitated the Declaration of Independence. The Lee Resolution is what got our folks out of their seats and resolved them to do something about the atrocities that they could no longer stomach, to the point that they declared our independence. So yes, words and resolute actions mean something in the history of this country. 45 years ago, our Supreme Court of the United States made one of the worst mistakes it's made since it ruled that slavery was okay under our form of government. We had to fight a civil war to overturn the errors of those misgotten ideas of freedom. Today we're here before you with the resolution that reminds not only South Dakotans but America what our country was founded upon, what our Constitution says, and what our laws say. The purpose of the United States Constitution is explicit. It says to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Folks, our posterity is our children and our preborn children that are coming. That's our posterity. That is the future. It is our job to secure the blessings of freedom for them. South Dakota Codified Law 26-1-2 states, a child conceived but not born is to be deemed an existing person so far as may be necessary for its interests in the event of its subsequent birth. Folks, our most important blessing is the right to live. That came from the good Lord. The right to life of all innocent persons is God-given and unalienable. Since the tragic day that our Supreme Court ruled that it was okay for abortions to be held across this land, a figure that makes me blanch, a figure that makes me nauseated to the pit of my stomach. We have aborted over 66,289 babies in the United States since 1973. Not to make light of the atrocities of World War II, but it makes those atrocities pale in comparison to what we have allowed underneath the blessings of freedom in this country. Now, every politician I've ever talked with said that they oppose abortion. They just do it in different fashions. It's unacceptable that we allow this procedure still to occur in this free nation. It is an affront to everything that I believe in. It's an affront to the liberties that you and I enjoy. And I bring this resolution for you today to endorse with your result standing to oppose it with every fiber of your being, to prevent this from happening to future generations, to find a solution to make this stop. We owe it to our posterity. I would appreciate your support. Thank you.
Further remarks? Hearing no further remarks, the question before the Senate is Senator Nelson's motion that SCR 3 be adopted. Those in favor of adoption will vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Madam Secretary will call the roll.
Senator Bolin? Aye. Kamak is excused. Cronin? Aye. Kurd? Aye. Ewing? Aye. Frerichs? Aye. Greenfield? Aye. Haverly? Aye. Heinert? No. Jensen? Aye. Kennedy? No. Killer? No. Klum? Aye. Colbeck? Aye. Langer? Aye. Maher? Aye. Monroe? Aye. Nelson? Aye. Nesseba? No. Netherton? Aye. Norstrup? Aye. Otten? Aye. Partridge excused. Peters? Aye. Brush? Aye. Russell? Aye. Sohold? Aye. Solano? Aye. Stalzer? Aye. Sutton? Aye. Tapio? Aye. Tiedemann? Aye. White? Aye. Wick? Aye. Youngberg? Mr. President, there are 29 yeas, 4 nays, and 2 excused.
Senator Nelson's motion that Senate Concurrent Resolution number 3 be adopted, having received a majority vote of the members elect, is hereby declared passed, and the resolution is adopted.
Senator Kurd moves that Senate Bill 24 be placed on the calendar of February 7th, the 19th legislative day.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carried.
Senator Greenfield moves that House Bill 1028 be referred from the Committee on Commerce and Energy to the Committee on Judiciary.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carried. Okay, consideration of committee reports, please.
Senator Kurd moves the reports of the Standing Committee on Transportation on Senate Bill 72 and the Committee on Retirement Laws on Senate Bill 38 be adopted.
All those in favor of adoption signify by saying aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carried. Now we're on to consideration of executive appointments. Much like the United States Senate, except we're functional. Thank you for playing.
Hey, they're back. They're back at work. They're back at work now.
Yeah, they're back to work. Yes. The responsibility of the senators here is to consider appointments that have come from executive branch or other individuals, and they get to agree or disagree, and that's called an advice and consent. And so there are a couple of executive appointments that have been made by the governor will be discussed at this point. Consideration of executive appointments.
Senate proceeds to the consideration of the executive appointment of Don Kierkegaard of Sturgis, South Dakota, to the position of Secretary of the Department of Education.
Thank you very much. Senator Boland, good afternoon again, sir.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Today, members, I bring to you the nomination of Don Kierkegaard to be the new Secretary of Education for the state of South Dakota. Don's a lifelong resident of the state, a graduate of Flandreau High School, and a career educator. He's a graduate of South Dakota State, and he began his teaching career in Bristol, a small community near Aberdeen. From there, after 7 years, he moved to Britain, where he was a principal and then superintendent of schools. He was in Britain for a number of years before moving to Meade County to become their superintendent, a position he held until the governor approached him to become the new secretary following the retirement of Melody Shop. I have not known Don for very long, but I've been impressed with his commitment and his diligence. There are at least 3 reasons I urge your support for this nominee. First, his experience in education. He is well versed in the field and is supported by his colleagues in total. I'd just like to add, I've received no mention from any school superintendent. The school administrators have heard no criticism of this nominee. He has a stellar reputation for many across the state in the field of education. Secondly, he is a selfless and dedicated person. The fact that he was willing to resign his job in Sturgis and take this position when asked by the governor demonstrates a servant's heart. It would have been very easy to turn down a governor in his last year of office because it is likely that Mr. Kierkegaard will be out of a job come next January, and that's some of the statements he made before the Education Committee. However, when asked by the governor, he responded to the call and has agreed, if confirmed, to serve in this capacity for the remainder of Governor Daugaard's term. I believe this action demonstrates a genuine willingness to do what is best for students and schools. I admire that on a personal basis. As many know very well, I respectfully disagree with him on some educational issues, but he has impressed me as a person of integrity and thoughtful decision-making. I see no good reason to reject this nominee and thereby leave the Department of Education leaderless for almost an entire year. Don has described himself as a short-term employee, and again, that's very likely to be true. Rejection of this nominee would damage the department and the work of schools in our state as we seek to comply with ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, and other federal requirements. I urge support of Mr. Kierkegaard to be the new Secretary of Education. I'm confident he will do a commendable and effective job, and if there's questions, I'll do my very best to answer them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Boland. Further remarks? Senator Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. President. If I could have a little latitude to get into educational philosophy.
We'll see, but please proceed.
Okay. Thank you very much. As you may have received on your desk, the South Dakota STAR Student Teacher Accountability and Reporting System, the report card 2016-2017, and one of those sheets has to do with the English language arts grades for our students. And this is all about the Nationalized Common Core standards and how they have affected our students. All students in South Dakota, 48%, were not able to achieve the metric necessary to go on to higher ed. If I may just refer to the Smarter Balanced ELA, Education, Language, Arts, Literary Achievement Level Descriptors. It describes level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. Level 1 says the student has not met the achievement standard and needs substantial improvement to demonstrate the knowledge and skills in English, language, arts, literacy needed for likely success in entry-level credit-bearing college coursework after high school. The student has not met the achievement standard. Level 2 says the student has nearly met the achievement standard. Well, that's like kind of nearly hitting the bullseye if you're aiming at a target. That's kind of like nearly getting to the finish line on a marathon. You either have or you haven't. You've either made it or you haven't. And on this page regarding the math, all grades, 54% of all students didn't make the cut. 54%. As far as American Indians, 84% didn't make the cut. This is math. You can't get into higher ed if you don't have success in math. I was talking to Dr. Dan Bolin at School of Mines a while back, and he was saying that it's unbelievable how many students fall short in math. The president of Western Dakota Tech told me that 90% of her students weren't proficient in math. And this is the product of the Nationalized Common Core standards, and this is a philosophy that is embraced by the nominee for our next Secretary of Education. On the other sheet, we have, did I already cover the English, language, arts, or did I just cover math?
You did them both, yes, sir.
I did them both. Thank you very much. And then I've got a letter from the South Dakota Kids Count, Beacon School of Business, University of South Dakota in Vermilion. And in the second paragraph, it says, South Dakota's index score of 220 for American Indian children is the lowest score of any group in any state across the nation. The lowest score of any group in any state across the nation. If that doesn't break your heart, you don't have a heart. These are kids. No wonder they're killing themselves. Suicide is epidemic on the reservation. They have no hope. They find themselves frustrated with an educational system that the way it's designed, only those in the middle are allowed a chance at succeeding, those that are above the metric. And I compare it to when my wife was going through 29 rounds of radiation when she had breast cancer. And the radiologist showed me a graph on the computer. It had two parallel lines, and if my wife was to move or flinch or something during radiation treatment, the mark would go above the line or it would go below the line. And what we have here is we have students who are above the line, but they don't count. They get cut off, just like the radiation beam gets cut off if you're above the mark, because you're too smart. If you lack the necessary skills and you're not quite up to par educationally, then you fall below the line and you're left behind. When I was going door to door a couple years ago in a campaign, I ran across a lady who, she's an engineer, her husband's an engineer, and she has two girls, and they're like 7 and 8. And she said, they're being left behind the way the system is designed. She said they're brilliant kids, they're extremely smart, but she said they're getting left behind, and I'm going to have to pull them out and homeschool them because the system is not working for them. Now I'd like to quote one of our members, It's laudatory. Everything in America that's related to education had to conform to Common Core, top down, one size fits all, coming from this American Council on Education. The elitist who pushed this agenda on us 7 or 8 years ago and had an educational department here in this state of South Dakota that bought into it 100%, lock, stock, and barrel, and fought every effort of the people of this state to try and get some reforms in the educational patterns of this state. We had to fight the education department, the whole second floor, everybody else, but we now see the results of this disastrous educational program. Let's learn a lesson and not go down the top-down, one-size-fits-all approach to education. This 4-sentence speech that I just quoted was by the Senate Ed Chair in 2016 on the House floor, and it pretty much sums it up. And it did get a standing ovation, I might add. So here we are. We've been asked to confirm a nominee for our next Secretary of Education, someone who has embraced the failed nationalized Common Core standards for years. Surely we can find a teacher, a superintendent, someone in this state that hasn't embraced Common Core and can help us move forward with sensible and productive standards. Please vote no for this nominee. Thank you.
Senator White. Thank you, Senator Jensen. Good afternoon, Senator White.
Thank you, Mr. President. I guess I would like to stand in support of Mr. Kierkegaard. I did watch him as he was superintendent of schools in Britain, South Dakota, where he not only administrated the school in a very positive manner, but also initiated a working process as they built onto their school, and then also brought in another school system that was part of always a contentious process, and he did it very positively. I also worked with him in numerous summer studies and workshops where he always was positive and innovative to resolve the challenges that we were working for. I always appreciated that. I did visit with all the superintendents in my district, and they all said they were very pleased that Mr. Kierkegaard was selected as our next Secretary of Education. I appreciate your consideration of Mr. Kierkegaard. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator White. Senator Ewing. Good afternoon, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also stand in support of the appointment of Don Kierkegaard. And how I became to know this gentleman was 6 years ago, to be exact, when my first year to come to the Senate. In our community, every year prior to session, we meet with our local superintendents. The legislators from District 31 do, as well as the superintendents from Meade County and Butte County. And that's where I got to know Mr. Kierkegaard, and I've been very impressed with his wisdom. He's dedicated this man has dedicated his life to education. And I sat in on part of the education committee hearing up here the other morning, as well as live streamed the rest of it that I was unable to be in person to listen to. And I was very satisfied in the way he answered all the questions that was posed to him. And I've heard the disgruntledness about different things and blaming Mr. Kierkegaard on different things, but I haven't seen any factual proof on that. So I don't put any weight on that at all. It was almost like there was a witch hunt going on here for a while, and I stand before you asking you to support this man. He's going to be missed in his community up there as the superintendent. Everyone was very, very satisfied with this man, and I ask for your yes vote on this.
Thank you, sir. Matakipi, Senator Heiner.
Mitakepi, Mr. President. Well, I too rise in support of Don Kierkegaard. And let me tell you why. I didn't know Mr. Kierkegaard prior to this fall's events that happened at Sturgis Brown High School. If you didn't see, there was an act happen, not at a school function or endorsed event, but it was racially motivated, racially charged. And he and his school board made the decision to cancel all homecoming activities. That could not have been very popular in Meade County. But it was the right thing to do. And it was swift, and it was appropriate. I reached out to him after that and thanked him for his actions, because I didn't think what had happened was right, and asked him if he would like me to come out and visit with students or staff or parents or anybody to talk about race relations in South Dakota. I'd be willing to do that. And he got back to me right away and said that invitation would be open, and we would work towards that. It wasn't much time after that I saw he had been nominated to be the new Secretary of Ed. So then we had a meeting with him during the LNI tournament in Rapid City. And I'm glad the senator from Rapid City brought these out. Because what most people don't understand, they think tribal schools are this island and that the state has no kind of say or jurisdiction within tribal schools. But what I want the body to understand is that if the BIE doesn't have an accountability workbook, of which goes along with these, then we have to follow the state's plan. And we have to give our kids the Smarter Balance exam. We have to do all the stuff that the rest of the state schools do. So we talked about that, Mr. Kierkegaard, myself, a few other education professionals, and we invited him down to St. Francis Indian School. He graciously accepted. He came and met with our superintendent and some leading educational professionals on our reservation, toured our school, toured the elementary school and the middle school and the high school. And we started that conversation about what is the role of the Department of Ed and tribal schools in the state. And he has committed to go to every single tribal school in our state and visit with those folks. He's also committed that we would look at providing the flexibility so that we can assess our kids the way we want to assess them. He took a tour of the Todd County Middle School, the Native American Achievement Grant School that's at Todd County. And that thing, in 2 years, has turned that school around. And he is committed to bringing those programs forward and pushing those and working with us and our tribal education departments for the betterment of our children. That's something we haven't had before. We had some glimpses. I thank the administration for setting that task force up. We've started that conversation. Mr. Kierkegaard is going to follow through. And he's going to work with us. He's committed it publicly. He's already made that first step. And I get it. He's probably a short-term employee. I see that. But that doesn't mean we can't do good things. I think this, to me, what we saw here today, Mr. Kierkegaard is trying to address that. He's going to work with us, and he's going to work with our families and our communities and our tribal ed departments where we can change this around, just like they have at the Todd County Middle School. So I would appreciate, and I ask, for your favorable consideration of Mr. Kierkegaard. Pilamia Apala.
Pilamia. Further remarks? Senator Frerichs, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, and I too just want to echo many of the comments that have been made in support of Mr. Kierkegaard. As you look on his resume, he spent 30 years up in the Northeast of his career, and I know my dad, a former member of the other body over on the House side, had talked about every year that Mr. Kierkegaard was at Bristol, he made a point to bring his students out to the Capitol, and it's a 3.5-hour trip to make it to Pierre from the Northeast and where he was at. And so that obviously shows the commitment that he had to introduce those young people to the government process, which we know is very important. I also just want to call attention to the 3 schools that he has been at between Bristol, Britton, and Sturgis Brown. There's really 3 unique schools, and aside from even the geographic difference, but looking from within those schools, and I just have to share, you look at Sturgis Brown right now, it probably has one of the fastest growing Future Farmers of America, the FFA program chapters in our state. And obviously the advisor there is doing awesome work, but in order to have a successful FFA program, and they were here last week, of course, but in order to have that, you need administration support. And clearly that's happening out there. Ask for your support from Mr. Kierkegaard. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, sir. Further remarks? Does anybody wish to speak before Senator Boland speaks in rebuttal? Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I rise with a little bit of concern. What's noticeably missing from this conversation is the representation of a large section of South Dakota that submitted a resolution, a petition to the South Dakota State Joint Tribal Relations Committee. The Oglala tribe passed a resolution and a petition to the legislature opposing this nomination. And we haven't heard anything about that today. Neither have we heard the fact that our own State Joint Tribal Relations Committee voted 9-1 to oppose this appointment. Now, the reasons for the committee taking such an action is over the last decade, approximately $100 million out of Gear Up and other grants that were supposed to be intended for Native American youth in the state of South Dakota effectively disappeared into the landscape. Now, instead of us having thorough, detailed legislative oversight into this problem, administration and others have made a concerted effort to make sure that those that were involved and had a hand in it never answered any questions under oath, and we don't have an actual roadmap of where all that money went to. But what we do have is the aftermath of the cataclysmic results of the last decade. And as the good gentleman from out in Rapid City earlier testified, I believe it was in the Argus Leader, South Dakota Native kids were ranked dead last in the nation. Dead last, folks. Now, only the good Lord knows how much that $100 million was truly dedicated and reached every one of these last kids on our tribal communities, what of an impact that would have made. We can only surmise it would have made a massive impact. Now, during this time frame, the good gentleman was involved with an organization, a company that was involved in the Gear Up grants. He's admitted that he received some monies out of this for consulting work. Now, the problem I have with this is he was a full-time South Dakota superintendent, and he was moonlighting doing this. Now, most of the superintendent contracts in the state of South Dakota have do not moonlight provisions. They are paid, most of them are paid pretty good salaries, specifically to concentrate on the issues affecting their school districts. And yet, this gentleman readily admits that that wasn't enough on his plate, and he was out on other areas dealing with this. And his full involvement with the Gear Up and other grants that are suspect and are being criminally prosecuted for the mismanagement, misappropriation will never truly be known. Now, I would remind this hallowed body of the wise sentiments of, say, the modern-day grandfather of my party. The man said, "Trust but verify." Folks, we have not verified anything. We have had opposition to looking into this. We have no idea where all that money basically disappeared to. We don't even have the records anymore to look at it. And here we now have before us an appointment with a massive dark shadow hanging over it, and we're glibly pushing for it to be accomplished without even acknowledging the heartfelt sentiments of our Native community, a big section of which oppose this appointment. I think he's a very fine gentleman. My problem is that his involvement in this scandal leaves me unable to support him, and I must oppose him. Thank you.
Thank you. Further remarks? Senator Killer.
Matakipi, how? Thank you, Mr. President and members of the body. I'm going to get up and also oppose based on the resolution that was passed out, but I just want to remind the body that it came from our OST Education Committee, at the urging, and even our OST Education Committee is kind of conflicted on the nature because they realize the value of working with both sides, but also, what this is going to entail. And one of the things I appreciate about the last speaker getting up and talking about is that it wasn't the Native American that had to get up and raise the issue, and I think that's a big thing that's kind of missed in all of this, like it's over time, it's been, just natives trying to raise the issue, but now we're beginning to get more and more recognition as being members of the state, being citizens of the state. And, these are some of our issues, but these are also some of our problems. And that's something that, was frustrating through this whole, the whole summer, was actually dealing with how this came about, was that, the blame was placed on Native committee members of not voting for something that was caused by non-natives, And so I think that that's something that is really needs to be thought about. And one of the other things that I appreciate about the nominee is I didn't, I think, we didn't appreciate what happened with Garrett, but Native communities don't appreciate what happens with racism in this state, and that's something to really think about. And I do appreciate the Secretary of stepping out, of the comfort zone and taking a really strong stance on that. So, but just based on the wishes of my Education Committee, I'm going to vote no against it, but I do vote however you feel. So thank you, Mr. President.
Belamia. Senator Soholt.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I rise in support of Don Kierkegaard as position of Secretary of the Department of Education. And I sat through the Senate Education hearing, and I just want to be very clear that there were direct questions asked about involvement in Gear Up. The answer was no. He had full disclosure, this nominee, in relationship to having been hired on a consulting contract with a group that wasn't directly, the contract of itself was not directly involved with Gear Up, but it was to help with 3 superintendent searches in the state of South Dakota. He was completely and totally transparent, and that was the only connection at all with people that perhaps were connected with Gear Up. I can't even speak to that part, but I want to be crystal clear that that was asked and definitively answered. And Don Kierkegaard was helping to secure appropriate superintendent candidates for schools in South Dakota that were having a hard time recruiting. So he was helping to vet and assist with schools having strong superintendents to run them.
Senator Tapio. Good afternoon, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President.
You're welcome.
I just had a really good conversation with Mr. Kierkegaard before this session, and I do believe that he is a pretty an honorable gentleman. I shared with him my concerns with the State Department of Education. There's a cloud hanging over the Department of Education, and it's developed over the last several years. I'm new to this body, but I've come to know a little bit about what that cloud is all about. I wanted to share with the body and the people in the gallery and the people listening exactly what the concerns of the people that maybe even led to these campaign finance reform bills that came up last year. There's a concern that the people don't have a voice, that there's something going on in government, that it's not an open and transparent operation that's going on. So there's 3 issues that I've boiled it down to that I believe that you guys, that everybody should be aware of. The first one is that I've talked to many superintendents around the state, and I believe that there's a concern that's prevalent, that there's something in our school systems regarding the Senate Bill 73, which is Juvenile Justice Program. I spoke with many of the superintendents over this last summer, and I also spoke with the head of the Superintendents Association out of Watertown, and he indicated that it's very unusual to have unanimous agreement amongst the superintendents. And one of the things that I think Mr. Kierkegaard needs to address is the effect that this idea of presumptive probation has on the school systems, because we're placing kids right back in the same environment, and there is the peer pressure of those people that are having troubles. It's really affecting the educational system, and I hope that he would address this. Just a few weeks ago, the governor put out a report that said everything is on track on the juvenile justice system. That's not true. The people actually understand that are working with this situation that it's something that needs to be addressed. The second thing is that it's an issue that I've been bringing up for quite a while now, that there's something going on in our educational system, that there's a tolerance of the drug usage in the school systems. I recently worked with a person that graduated from a school in South Dakota, and he indicates that nearly 80 to 90% of the children graduating from high school have used marijuana. He also indicated that 40 to 50% of the children are somewhat habitual users of marijuana. This is anecdotal, so I went to many other educators and many other folks, and that seems to me that that's an issue that needs to be addressed. It's a growing and gathering threat. So when we look at the meth issue and the opioid issue, I believe that that idea that you get high, that somehow that there's this idea that there's an alternative type of a philosophy, a drug culture, I think that's taking root in our school systems, and I hope that Mr. Kierkegaard would address that as well. I think we need a zero-tolerance policy in the school systems for drug use. The third thing is that the administration of the Gear Up grants. The Gear Up grants it's more than one grant. There's an entire group of grants that came through to help Native children go to access college. And the concern that I have is that it's a pool of money that the federal government was giving away, and that it's very, there's an incentive, there's a perverse incentive maybe to do the wrong thing, and maybe good people could get sucked into the idea that you would do the wrong thing. And so as soon as you have a pot of money, and you become, say, a Secretary of Education, and then you leave government, it's a possible, just open up the possibility of your minds to believe that it's possible that you would create that pool of money and then financially benefit from it a little bit later. And I think it's important to address that issue within the framework of the next year or two to clear the name of the Department of Education. Because when you're tasked, when you set up a program, you hire all the people in the program, and you're paid to evaluate and analyze the program, but when there's an investigation, when the program goes wrong, you have nothing to say, that you would refuse to testify because now you're outside of the government. That doesn't give the people of South Dakota enough information to be able to make a clear and concise decision. So I'm going to be opposing Mr. Kierkegaard, but I also want to be able to say that I look forward to working with him and sitting down and to try to solve very, very difficult problems in the next year of his career. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I want to address a couple of pieces of misinformation that were quoted by our friend here on the floor from Hanson County. He talked a little bit about Gear Up, and he talked a little bit about $100 million of money that disappeared. I would tell you that we have a special audit report that was issued on May 19th by the Legislative Audit. They are legislative employees. They audit state government. And they actually had the authorization and a court order to follow the money. They did the special report. They did a special audit. They reviewed all of the transactions, and they followed the money all the way down. They didn't just stop at state government. They went through and issued reviews and investigations of Mid-Central. Not only did they issue audit reports and findings on Mid-Central, they followed the money through all of the subsidiaries of Mid-Central and all of the related parties. The criminal activity that they found with the people that were alive have been turned over to the DCI. Government Operations and Audit has reviewed these audit reports and these special revenue reports. Government Operations and Audit does not have the authorization to go to the subrecipients and the subrecipients of the subrecipients and the other related. However, our staff have. That's important to note. The money didn't just disappear, it's been accounted for. They know exactly where it went. The question comes down to evaluation and reporting and monitoring. There are bills from our review through Government Operations and Audit coming through this session to clarify. Just because the information was unethical does not mean at that time it was illegal. That behavior today, when you're talking about Gear Up, is illegal today, and we will clarify more this year. But a lot of the misstatements as far as missing money, $100 million, report issued, just remember, we've accounted for it, our staff has done it, they've reviewed it. So I just want you all to be clear, when we have false information being put on the report, around on the floor, we have it. We have the information, our staff have the information, and the criminal activity has been turned over. As our good friend from Minnehaha County stated, Mr. Kierkegaard had nothing to do. He stated that open and honestly. Had nothing to do with the Gear Up. So I just want you all to know that I will be supporting his nomination. I do believe that our staff have done their job, and with that, I'll stand down. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Senator Russell, thank you for your patience, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the body. I greatly appreciate the clarification that we got from the previous speaker. I sat there in Vermillion, and the testimony from the students that had gone through a lot of these things had to do with not just $64 million, but $100 million. And the fact that there was a waiver that allowed the spending of that money not on the Native American students for scholarships. They had to get a waiver from the federal government to do that. And that's what happened. And there are a lot of people here in the state that have benefited in some way, shape, or form. And a lot of them served on the South Dakota Board of Education appointed by the governor of the state of South Dakota at the time that this took place. The question for me is, and I really do want to thank the senator from Rapid City for the quantifiable information that he's presented. Mr. Kierkegaard may very well be a very nice person, and he may work very hard. I'm not disputing that. But as I look at the abject failure of the state of South Dakota to educate its kids from these two reports that were put in front of all of us, what comes to my mind is it appears like what we're doing by voting in favor of this nomination is we're doubling down on what we've done and what we've failed to do. And particularly, what I'm referencing is the fact that Mr. Kierkegaard, at the time of his appointment, was the president of the South Dakota Board of Education. And he had been on that board for quite some time. He was part and parcel of the implementation over the last 7 years of Common Core that has failed our students, and then oversaw the administration of the Department of Education that had a duty to make sure that this $100 million, you may say $64 million, but it's in excess of $100 million. They had a duty to make sure that it actually helped these students that are, unfortunately, according to these statistics, last in the nation. I know it's a temporary appointment by a lame duck governor that may very well end up being only for a year. But when you have this kind of failure on such a catastrophic level, can these students afford another year of this failure before we actually try to help them? And so, just because we have a nomination does not mean that we have no obligation as a Senate to look at the real validity of that nomination and make sure that it is the best nominee that we can possibly put forward for our students, instead of simply rubber stamping something that has, in all practical purposes, been a failure. And you know, the irony of the fact that my good friend from Canton gives the nominating speech after railing, and I mean railing, I listened to it last night, against Common Core just a few short years ago, really concerns me about the level of partisanship, even at the state level. And what I mean by that is that, well, this is our governor, and therefore we have to back the decision no matter how flawed the decision is, and no matter how the appearance of the decision is in the eyes of the tax-paying public of this state. Each of us has a constitutional role in this system. What we're doing right now is our constitutional function. You heard those pages today, swear an oath to the Constitution. My question for you is as you vote today, are you fulfilling your role or are you abdicating your responsibility? I thank you.
Thank you, sir. Senator Greenfield, good afternoon, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon to you. Ladies and gentlemen, I hesitate to even stand. So some of you say, so sit down. But I just want to try to refocus the discussion here. And I want to share a little bit, if I might, about the gentleman who's being debated right now. I've told this story a couple times, and I'll tell it here on the floor, because I had never met Mr. Kierkegaard until perhaps the session of 2012 or 2013, and he worked with me on a couple of bills. I had brought a couple of bills that did hit close to home for his school district, and he worked with me throughout the process. I believe it was the year afterwards, after he had switched and gone out west and began serving as a superintendent out west, that he sent me a very nice note after session thanking me for the work that I did and my fellow senators and representatives did for education. And he said, you know, basically we don't always agree on all the issues, but I want you to know how much your efforts are appreciated. And that frankly endeared him to me, because I don't receive a lot of warm and fuzzies from his realm, to be frank. So going forward, I hadn't had a lot of interaction with him. When his nomination came up, I remained, I guess I kept my distance. I didn't know where things might come out in the wash. And I did try to remain objective. I listened to people on both sides. Last week, at the end of the week, Mr. Kierkegaard availed himself of me for over an hour and sat down in my office, and I asked him a whole host of questions, and he shared with me a lot of information. And as he looked me in the eye, and we focused only on the questions that frankly should be relevant. I mean, philosophy is one thing, and I do want to go on a little bit of a sidebar. To think that we can defeat this nomination here today and find a new nominee who meets with our approval because that person's opposed to Common Core or this or that or the other thing, it simply isn't going to happen. The governor has the right to choose that whom he or she would like to see in this capacity. And that person's philosophy is going to have to mesh with the governor's. And so I guess to keep it in perspective, should we defeat this nomination today, what's going to happen is we will have a new person who occupies that office, and we won't even probably get a chance to weigh in on that because it would happen as a recess appointment after session. So, back to what I said. Mr. Kierkegaard availed himself of me and allowed me to ask a whole, as I said, a number of questions. I believe that he was being honest as he answered those questions. I believe that the implications here that he's closer to some of these issues is false. I understand the guilt by association, but a person has to get pretty creative in order to draw certain conclusions that have been at least implied here today. So I'm asking you to give favorable consideration to Mr. Kierkegaard. I'm asking you to hold his feet to the fire, to be honest with him as to what your concerns are, to be palms up. I think the man, as I said, is honest, and I appreciated the opportunity to get to know more about him, more of who he was, and more of how he hopes to serve the education realm going forward. And as has been noted here today, it's a fairly noble undertaking in as far as he has given up a job that would provide more permanent employment for one that offers far less than that. So I encourage you to give your favorable support to Mr. Kierkegaard, and I thank you for your time and your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Kurd.
Thank you, Mr. President. In accordance with Joint Rule 5-6, I respectfully call the previous question with regard to the Senate's role to the advise and consent of Don Kierkegaard.
It is non-debatable. All those in favor of calling the previous question again in debate signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carried. Senators, the question before you is whether or not you advise and consent to the executive appointment of Don Kierkegaard to the Secretary of the Department of Education. Those in favor of that appointment will vote aye. Those opposed to that appointment will vote nay. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Bolin. Aye. Cronin. Aye. Kurd. Aye. Ewing. Aye. Frerichs. Aye. Greenfield. Aye. Haverly. Aye. Heinert. Aye. Jensen. Nay. Kennedy. Aye. Killer. No. Klum. Aye. Kolbeck. Aye. Langer. Aye. Maher. Aye. Monroe. Aye. Nelson. Nay. Nessebar. Aye. Netherton. Aye. Norstrup. Aye. Otten. Partridge is excused. Peters. Aye. Rush. Aye. Russell. No. Soholt. Aye. Solano. Aye. Stalzer. No. Sutton. Aye. Tapio. No. Tiedemann. Aye. White. Aye. Wick. Aye. Youngberg. Mr. President, there are 26 yeas, 7 nays, and 2 excused.
Thank you. The question, does the Senate advise and consent to the executive appointment of Don Kierkegaard to the position of the Secretary of the Department of Education? Having received an affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected, is hereby declared passed, and that appointment is so confirmed. Next appointment.
The Senate proceeds to the consideration of the executive appointment of Becky Guffin of Aberdeen, South Dakota, to the South Dakota Board of Education Standards.
Senator Norstrup, good afternoon, sir. Good to see you, and I'm glad you got Andrew home safe.
Thank you, Mr. President. And he had a wonderful time, and amazing amount of kindness was extended to him, and he'll be back. Thank you, Mr. President. I stand today to ask your vote, your positive vote on Dr. Becky Guffin, as she has extensive education experience in all levels of education. She started her career as a 5th grade teacher in Aberdeen, and 23 years later she rose to superintendent. During that time period, she got her master's degree, her bachelor's degree from Northern, and went on to get a education specialist and a doctorate degree from the University of South Dakota. She was named the South Dakota Curriculum Director of the Year, and also she received the award of the South Dakota Counseling Association and the Gordon Polling Award. She has extensive experience in curriculum development, knowledge of federal laws and regulation concerning education. She has taught courses at Northern on education. Most importantly, she cares deeply about the children. She cares deeply about education. She's also been involved in the community, and that's where I got to know her. I've known Dr. Guffin for approximately 15 years, and extensive community involvement and also involvement on the state level. She was on the Blue Ribbon Task Force. She's an outstanding candidate for this position, and I would ask for your support and confirmation of Dr. Becky Guffin. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator. Further remarks? Senator Bolin.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Just one thing, other fact you should know, that this appointment is for a one-year term only. As it is that's when Mr. Kierkegaard resigned, this person is replacing him on the board. 1 year only. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Heinert, Matakipi.
Matakipi, Mr. President. Well, I too rise in support of Dr. Becky Guffin. I served with her on the Blue Ribbon Task Force. I find that she is committed to the well-being of the children of South Dakota. She truly cares about her children and the children clear across this state. So I think it's a great appointment. I look forward to the things that she can accomplish. Pilamia.
How? Further remarks? Hearing none, the question before the Senate is whether you advise and consent to the executive appointment of Dr. Becky Guffin to the Board of Education Standards. Those in favor of that appointment will vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Bolin? Aye. Cronin? Aye. Kurd? Aye. Ewing? Aye. Frerichs? Aye. Greenfield? Aye. Haverly? Aye. Heinert? Aye. Jensen? Aye. Kennedy? Aye. Killer? Aye. Klum? Aye. Kolbeck? Aye. Langer? Aye. Maher? Monroe? Aye. Nelson? Aye. Nesseba? Aye. Netherton? Aye. Norstrup? Aye. Otten? Aye. Partridge? Peters? Aye. Rush? Aye. Russell? Aye. Sohold? Aye. Solano? Aye. Dalzer? Aye. Sutton? Aye. Tapio? Tiedemann? Aye. White? Aye. Wick? Aye. Youngberg? Aye. Mr. President, there are 31 yeas, 2 nays, and 2 excused.
Thank you. The question, does the Senate advise and consent to the executive appointment of Dr. Becky Guffin to the South Dakota Board of Education Standards? Having received a majority vote of the members elected, is hereby declared passed, and her appointment is so confirmed. Last one.
Senate proceeds to the consideration of the executive appointment of Jacqueline Sly of Rapid City, South Dakota, to the South Dakota Board of Education Standards.
Welcome back, Senator Bolin.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, members of the body. I would like to bring to you today the nomination of Jacqueline Sly for a 4-year term on the State Board of Educational Standards. I have known Ms. Sly for almost 10 years, and I believe she is well qualified to serve on this board. I'll give you 3 reasons why I support this nomination. First, Jackie's a lifelong South Dakotan and a dedicated career teacher. She's taught in a number of geographical locations in our state and is a well-respected educator. Also, she's not a school administrator or a dean of education at one of the local universities. They have their place, but I'm glad to see the governor appoint a career teacher to this board. Jackie knows the struggles of the classroom and is well acquainted with the facts that her decisions will impact the teachers, the ones who actually do the work of educating the students in the classroom. I also want to state that I disagree with this nominee on a number of important educational issues, and she is acutely aware of that fact. However, I personally will not impose a litmus test on any nominee. My well-known, strong professional differences with Ms. Sly on important educational issues does not mean she is not qualified to be on this particular board. My experience with Ms. Sly is that she is fair-minded and open to discussion on many educational issues. This is not a lifetime appointment. If after 4 years her performance is less than stellar, she can be replaced. Secondly, and this is a more general comment on the advise and consent power of the Senate, we should be very deferential and cautious before we reject nominees of the governor or of any governor. This process should not be a rubber stamp, and we can see today that it is not. But again, we should most often give deference to the nominee of the governor. This is my personal political belief, especially when these are not lifetime appointments. Finally, a number of people have contacted me in regards to this nominee, urging the Education Committee to replace her with another nominee. I want to tell all of those folks that I have no power to appoint anyone to this post, and neither does the Education Committee. The power of appointment to any board is an authority exclusively reserved to the governor. Rejection of this nominee only allows the governor to appoint another nominee. And if he would delay making another appointment until we adjourn, then his nominee will serve on this board until another legislature meets in January of 2019 to evaluate that nominee. Therefore, based on my personal knowledge of this nominee, her extensive experience in the educational field, her willingness to serve, and the genuine political fact that rejection of this experienced and qualified nominee will likely result in a less adept, less qualified board member, I urge your affirmative vote despite my well-known professional differences with her on a number of educational issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Bolin. Further remarks? Hearing no further remarks, the question before the Senate is, do you advise and consent to the executive appointment of Jacqueline Slide of the South Dakota Board of Educational Standards? Those in favor of that appointment will vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Bolin? Aye. Kamak? Cronin? Aye. Kurd? Aye. Ewing? Aye. Frerichs? Aye. Greenfield? Aye. Haverly? Aye. Heinert? Aye. Jensen? Aye. Kennedy? Aye. Killer? Aye. Klum? Aye. Colbeck? Aye. Langer? Aye. Maher? Aye. Monroe? No. Nelson? Nesseba? Aye. Netherton? Aye. Norstrup? Aye. Otten? Peters? Aye. Rush? Aye. Russell? No. Soholt? Aye. Solano? Aye. Stalzer? No. Sutton? Aye. Tapio? No. Tiedemann? White? Aye. Wick? Aye. Youngberg? Aye. Mr. President, there are 25 yeas, 8 nays, and 2 excused.
The question, does the Senate advise and consent to the executive appointment of Jacqueline Slide of the South Dakota Board of Educational Standards? Having received a majority vote of the members elect is hereby declared passed, and that appointment is so confirmed. Next is first reading of Senate bills. We need to do that in open session, and then I'll read the assignment of the bills in concert with our Constitution. Please proceed.
We're going to read these together today. Senate Bill 100, an act to establish certain provisions related to grant monitoring and review. 101, an act to prohibit certain non-discriminatory pricing between malt beverage suppliers and malt beverage wholesalers. 102, an act to revise certain provisions defining gifts from registered lobbyists to public officials. 103, an act to prohibit aliens who are not lawfully present in the United States from attending any public post-secondary educational institution or from receiving certain educational financial assistance. 104, an act to repeal and revise certain provisions relating to the requirements for a permit to carry a concealed pistol. 105, an act to authorize a healthcare practitioner to administer a toxicology test to an infant under certain circumstances. And 106, an act to establish certain provisions regarding the placement of a foster child with a relative or close family friend.
Senate Bill 101 and 107 will be heard by Commerce, Education 103, Health and Human Services 105, 106, 108, 109, 100, Judiciary 104, 111. State Affairs is assigned 102, 110, and SJR number 3. What we're doing here is the Constitution requires that these bills be read in open session and the assignments of them in open session. So that's why we're talking, our team is talking at the same time, because it's already into the computers and people can keep track of it. But when we became a state, people needed to keep track of where these bills went. And so consequently, they had the old pencil and paper drill. So they knew that these bills would not be hidden, and now on the computer it's all open. So we'll proceed now with the first reading of House bills.
House Bill 1001, an act to revise certain provisions regarding voter registration list maintenance mailings. 1013, an act to revise certain provisions regarding voter systems used in elections and to declare an emergency. 1014, an act to revise certain provisions regarding the application of the intrastate exemption for certain commercial vehicles from the federal motor carrier regulations. And House Bill 1015, an act to repeal the use of explosive, pyrotechnics, and fireworks for the protection of sunflower crops from the depredating birds.
Senators, and for those who are listening, I may have said that Senate Bill 100 went to Judiciary. I meant to say, if I didn't have that on record, that it goes to joint appropriations. So Senate Bill 100 is assigned by the President Pro Tem to joint appropriations. Now on to the House bills assigned by President Pro Tem. House Bills 1015, 1046, and 1047 to Ag and Natural Resources. Commerce 1030, 1039 and 1040 Health and Human Services, 1011 and 1013 Local Government, and Transportation will hear House Bill 1014. Thank you. We are now on to our consent calendar. We have 4 bills today on our consent calendar. A consent calendar is a non-debate calendar. They came out of committee unanimously, don't require 2/3 vote. Senators may ask questions or remove a bill for debate tomorrow, but it's an efficiency move on these bills for non-controversial matters. Please proceed.
Senate Bill 69, an act to allow certain registration and permit documents to be stored and presented electronically. Senate Bill 35, an act to revise the classification of juvenile correction agents in the South Dakota retirement system and to revise certain terminology regarding correctional staff. Senate Bill 36, an act to revise certain provisions regarding the South Dakota retirement system. And finally, Senate Bill 37, an act to revise the automatic enrollment provisions of the deferred compensation plan of the South Dakota retirement system.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Senate Bill 69, 35, 36, and 37 have received a second reading, are all up for consideration and final passage. Senators, any questions on any of these bills? Hearing none, the question before the Senate, therefore, is final passage of Senate Bill 69, 35, 36, and 37. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Madam Secretary, please call the group roll.
Senator Boland. Aye. Cronin. Aye. Kurd. Aye. Ewing. Aye. Frerichs. Aye. Greenfield. Aye. Haverly. Aye. Heinert. Jensen? Kennedy? Killer? Klum? Colbeck? Langer? Maher? Monroe? Nelson? Nesseba? Netherton? Norstrup? Otten? Partridge? Excused. Peters? Brush? Russell? Soholt? Solano? Stalzer? Sutton? Tapio? Tiedemann? White? Wick? Youngberg? Mr. President, there are 33 yeas, 2 excused.
Thank you. Senate Bill 69, 35, 36, and 37, having received a majority vote of the members-elect, are all hereby declared passed. Any questions on any of these titles? Titles are approved then. Thank you. Now we're on to our debate calendar. Please call 67.
Senate Bill 67, an act to permit a victim of child sex trafficking or exploitation to expunge any criminal or delinquency record obtained as a result of the victimization.
Thank you. Senate Bill 67, having received a second reading, is up for consideration and final passage. Senator Colbeck, good afternoon again, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the Senate, I stand in front of you today and to ask for your support on this bill, an act to permit a victim of child sex trafficking or exploitation to expunge any criminal or delinquency record obtained as a result of this victimization. Senators, when victims are trafficked, there's a chance that they've committed various crimes while under their traffickers' control. These charges have included prostitution, drug charges, theft, etc. Once a victim is identified and begins the healing process, their criminal records become a huge barrier to obtaining work, housing, care, and academic opportunities, depending on the state. It may also prevent them from obtaining a professional license, joining the military, obtaining or retaining a driver's license, or accusing benefits from crime victims' compensation. Despite much healing and restoration that may take place, facing barriers from criminal records results in further victimization. To move forward with the new identity, but it's extremely difficult to do that when you are constantly reminded of their past. They do not choose this life. They were trusted into it by force, fraud, or coercion. This is why Senate Bill 67 is so important. It gives youth an opportunity for new identity, to set them up for success and not for failure. I'm going to read a little excerpt from a victim that I cannot identify that testified in the committee, if I may, Mr. President.
Certainly.
This came from a young lady. Today, I'm 10 months clean of drugs and alcohol. I've been a client of Call to Freedom for about 2 years. I work full-time, and for most part, I am able to provide for myself. But once again, it's hard for me to live somewhere safe and comfortable because I have a felony and can't pass the background checks on housing applications. My record is currently in my way and stopping me from becoming an EMT. I work construction with some inappropriate men because construction is in a field that accepts my record and pays well. I've been proudly serving my community as a volunteer firefighter for 7 months now because this is something that gives me a sense of purpose and allows my past to be used beneficially to not just me, but others as well. I didn't always respect law enforcement, and the fire department had to be called many times to save me from overdosing. This is my way of making amends, thanking all those that helped me get to where I am today. However, there are many challenges involved in this. What us survivors have in common is the attitude that nothing is going to stop us. Even with these limitations on me, I have to tell you proudly that I saved my first life last week, the life of a 70-year-old man who was dead for 20-something minutes. I held his hand and felt his pulse come back. My dream is to become a Sioux Falls firefighter as well as a nationally certified EMT. The reason why this bill needs to be passed is because I promise you that these struggles that I've just told you about are the battles that every one of us victims of trafficking have to face. We are responsible for the decisions we make, plus consider the fact that we were taken against our will and that much of things on our record, especially as a juvenile, were a direct result of our life circumstances. When we are ready to start our healing process, our criminal record is typically a false representation of us. Our record is a barrier to us. It limits us from being able to obtain work and prevents us from becoming able to live in a safe neighborhood where we are not at risk to be re-victimized again. As I close, I urge you on behalf of those we serve, I'm speaking for the Call to Freedom and myself and our other colleagues, use your voice to let South Dakota youth victimized by sex trafficking know that we believe in them by supporting Bill number 67. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Colbeck. Further remarks? Hearing none, the question before the Senate is final passage of Senate Bill 67. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Bolin. Cronin. Kurd. Ewing. Frerichs. Greenfield. Haverly. Heinert. Jensen. Kennedy. Killer. Plum. Colbeck. Langer. Maher. Monroe. Nelson. Nesseba. Netherton. Norstrup. Otten. Peters. Rush. Russell. Soholt. Solano. Stalzer. Sutton. Tapio. Tiedemann. White. Wick. Youngberg. Kurd. Mr. President, there are 33 yeas, 2 excused.
Thank you. Senate Bill 67 having received a majority vote, the members-elect is hereby declared passed. Any questions on the title? Title's approved. Thank you very much.
Senate Bill 27, an act to make an appropriation from the Coordinated Natural Resources Conservation Fund to the State Conservation Commission and to declare an emergency.
Senate Bill 27 having received second reading is up for consideration and final passage. Good afternoon, Senator Cronin. Good to see you. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday, Mr. President, members of the Senate. Senate Bill 27 comes to us from Appropriations. This provides $1 million in spending authority for other funds that'll be deposited into the Coordinated Natural Resource Conservation Fund. This is its 25th year of existence. This is money that comes in from a subset of the gas tax. About $500,000 a year is deposited into this fund. And since it was established, the main goals are to carry out the purposes of the South Dakota Natural Resource Plan. Clean water, sustainable soils, habitat, and conservation of erosion. There's been about, since 1993, there's been about 560 projects totaling about $20 million that has been granted out of this conservation fund. It's been matched by roughly $74 million of private and of private individual funds in conjunction with the local conservation districts. Couple facts about it: only conservation districts can apply for these grants, and then they use the funds from this fund to go out and get matching grants for their local conservation districts. There's a conservation district in all 67 of our subsets of government in the state counties. It's kind of interesting, I spoke about it in appropriations. It's kind of, my family, my brothers kind of tell a good story about what's happened, and I think a lot of us could think back over our generations here in South Dakota and understand why this is so important. Because now this coordination board is starting to talk about soil health and how it's not just the trees, it's not just the riparian buffers along waterways, it's the soil in the field as well. So there's some projects out there, probably going to be some more education, but what I always think back to is my grandfather homesteaded the land and broke it. My dad spent 60 years taking every single bit of life out of the soil, and my brothers for the last 10 years are trying to figure out how to put the nutrients and what God gave us in the soil back in so it can produce better and give us more sustainable farming practices into the future. So with that, Mr. President and members, I'd urge support of Senate Bill 27.
Thank you, sir. Further remarks? Hearing none, the question before the Senate is final passage of Senate Bill 27, and it's an appropriation with an emergency clause, requires a 2/3 majority vote for passage. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Senator Boland? Aye. Cronin? Aye. Kurd? Ewing? Aye. Frerichs? Aye. Greenfield? Aye. Haverly? Aye. Heinert? Jensen? Aye. Kennedy? Aye. Killer? Aye. Klum? Aye. Kolbeck? Aye. Langer? Aye. Maher? Aye. Monroe? Aye. Nelson? Aye. Nesseba? Aye. Netherton? Aye. Northrup? Aye. Otten? Aye. Partridge? Excused. Peters? Aye. Rush? Aye. Russell? Aye. Soholt? Aye. Solano? Stalzer? Aye. Sutton? Aye. Tapio? Tiedemann? White? Wick? Youngberg? Kurd? Mr. President, there are 33 yeas, 2 excused.
Thank you. Senate Bill 27, having received a 2/3 majority vote of the members elected, is hereby declared passed. Any title questions? Title's approved then. Thank you.
Senate
Or-
Bill,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Senate Bill 40, an act to authorize the transfer of certain surplus real estate in Rapid City to the Ellsworth Development Authority and to declare an emergency.
Thank you. Senate Bill 40, having received a second reading, is up for consideration and final passage. Senator Haverly, good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you, Mr. President. I have the privilege today to speak to you on 2 of my favorite subjects, Ellsworth Air Force Base and economic development. As the title states, Senate Bill 40 authorizes the transfer of property in Rapid City to the Ellsworth Development Authority. This particular building was part of Western Dakota Tech campus, but hasn't been used for classes for quite some time. Long before it was used by the college, it was a large manufacturing building. Last session, you all voted for to turn it back into the state due to a reversionary clause, and Western Dakota Tech no longer has a use for it. Once the state took ownership, had it appraised, an auction took place with no bidders. The Ellsworth Development Authority is a state entity and can take over this property just like any other state entity. Once this transfer is complete, the Development Authority will have the ability to use the building for potential economic development uses. This bill provides an opportunity to remove a non-productive asset, one that's not earning money but costing us. If we give up this property to the Development Authority, it has a better shot of getting on the tax rolls. The long-term mission at Ellsworth is essential to the national defense of our country, and by passing this bill, the building can then be used as a tool by the Ellsworth Development Authority to use in future negotiations and support Ellsworth's mission. We have the Secretary of the Air Force, Heather Wilson, doing everything in her power in D.C. to restore the readiness of the force. Let's do our small part in South Dakota to ensure the stability of Ellsworth. It passed joint appropriations unanimously, and you know how those people are. So I urge a yes vote on Senate Bill 40 today.
Thank you. Further remarks? Hearing none, the question before the Senate is final passage of Senate Bill 40. It does have an emergency clause. Requires a 2/3 majority vote for passage. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Bolin? Cronin? Kurd? Ewing? Frerichs? Greenfield? Haverly? Heinert? Jensen? Kennedy? Killer? Klum? Kolbeck? Langer? Maher? Monroe? Nelson? Nesseba? Netherton? Norstrup? Otten? Peters? Rush? Russell? Soholt? Solano? Stalzer? Sutton? Tapio? Tiedemann? White? Wick? Youngberg? Nelson? Mr. President, there are 33 yeas, 2 excused.
Thank you. Senate Bill 40, having received a 2/3 majority vote of the members elected, is hereby declared passed. Any title questions? I'll approve the title then. Next, please.
Senate Bill 52, an act to authorize the Board of Regents to demolish the South Dakota State University building and to make an appropriations therefore.
Senate Bill 52, having received a second reading, is up for consideration and final passage. Who, senators, may want to speak on this? Any guesses? Any guesses? Oh, Senator Tiedemann. Good afternoon, sir. Good to see you. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. I guess I could say these are 2 of my favorite things, STSU and agriculture.
You just did.
That's
You just
right.
did
Thank
say
you.
it. Yeah,
Thank
that's
you. What this bill does, it authorized the demolition of a building formerly used for swine research. This building was constructed in 1976, Complete demolition of a building is requested, which requires legislative approval. This facility is non-heated, uninsulated, a pole structure with foundation and a concrete floor. The exterior siding is a light gauge corrugated metal panel. The facility is functionally obsolete and has been replaced by the New Swine Research and Education Facility that was completed in 2016. The facility has damage to the siding, warped doors, cracks in the floors, and it's actually heaved. The purlins are showing cracks at bearing points or center points of trusses, and the wood shows damage from moisture. It's been unused for about 15 years. It's only being used now for storage. But the intent is to remove this building, turn it back into grass that then can be harvested to feed some of the cows. The functionality of the building is no longer useful because it was done for very specified purposes, very small building. It's only about 7,000 square feet. The total cost to demolish it and remove the trash is about $17,000. It's other funds, not general funds. Thank you, Mr. President. I stand by for questions.
Thank you, sir. Senator Tiedemann. Further remarks? Senator Solano.
Mr. President, question for the previous
Yes, sir. State your question,
speaker.
please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just trying to understand if this bill was hog-housed.
Ooh. I was just kind of waiting for that. Senator Tiedemann, would you like to get in the mud on this or not?
This was not the building that was hog-housed. That was the farrowing unit a number of years ago. I think it was 1921. Thank you.
Next player. Any other callers? Hearing none, the question before the Senate is final passage of Senate Bill 52 does have the appropriation in it, even though it's other funds. It requires a 2/3 majority vote for passage. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Boland. Cronin. Kurd. Ewing. Frerichs. Greenfield. Haverly. Heinert. Jensen. Kennedy. Killer. Klum. Colbeck. Langer. Maher. Monroe. Nelson. Nesseba. Netherton. Norstrup. Otten. Peters. Rush. Russell. Soholt.
Aye.
Solano. Stalzer. Sutton. Tapio. Tiedemann. White. Wick. Youngberg. Mr. President, there are 31 yeas, 2 nays, and 2 excused.
Senate Bill 52, having received a 2/3 majority vote of the members elect, is hereby declared passed. Any title questions? Title's approved.
Senate Bill 56, an act to make an appropriation to fund tax refunds for elderly persons and persons with a disability and to declare an emergency.
Senate Bill 56, having received second reading, is up for consideration and final passage. Good afternoon, Senator Wick.
Well, good afternoon, Mr. President and Senators. I have an amendment. It has been circulated, and I wish to move it at this time.
That is marked 56 Sierra Alpha. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
You've moved that, and I heard a second. Please proceed.
I also ask permission to speak to the bill and the amendment.
Certainly, latitude's granted.
Thank you. I bring for your consideration this afternoon Senate Bill 56. If you would prefer, I can read the entire amendment to you. But if you glance through it, even though the numbers change year to year, this is an annual bill that has been with us since 1974 and provides some basic tax relief for elderly and disabled South Dakotans, and in some cases can make a difference in the ability of those involved to maintain their independence and stay in their own homes. The total appropriation for this bill is $450,000. The appropriation has been higher in the past, but actual payouts and utilization has traditionally landed inside this spending authority. Last year, a total of $417,476 was distributed to provide tax relief for the most vulnerable among us, and the average refund totaled $182.88. There's also a supplemental refund program which becomes available if there's at least $25,000 left over, and that amount is split equally among the 1,000 applicants with the lowest income, and no supplemental check may be greater than $100. This tax relief is offered to single-member households, as you can read in the amendment, with incomes less than or equal to $12,880, or multiple-member households with $16,240. These limits were increased by $210 for single households and $290 for multiple-member households to keep up with just a hint of inflation. Ladies and gentlemen, this bill supports the elderly and disabled and is a valuable tool to help support those with the greatest need. I thank you for your consideration of the bill and the amendment and urge you to pass the bill as amended, Senate Bill 56.
Thank you very much, sir. Further remarks on the amendment? Hearing none, all those in favor of Senator Wick's motion to amend marked 56 Sierra Alpha signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carried. 56 is so amended. Further remarks on Senate Bill 56 as amended? Hearing none, the question before this, I'm sorry, Senator Kennedy, I'm not quick enough.
Thank you. Just a question for the
Yes,
prime
sir.
sponsor.
Please state your question, Senator.
I also received a proposed amendment 56 STA.
Yes, sir. That's a title amendment. If you,
Okay.
If this passes, then we'll go to that. That's correct, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Further remarks? Hearing none, the question before the Senate is final passage of Senate Bill 56, now as amended. Those in favor, I'm sorry, it does require 2/3 majority vote. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Boland? Aye. Cronin? Aye. Kurd? Aye. Ewing? Aye. Frerichs?
Aye.
Greenfield? Haverly? Heinert? Jensen? Kennedy? Hiller? Klum? Colbeck? Langer? Maher? Monroe? Nelson? Nesseba? Netherton? Norstrup? Otten? Partridge is excused. Peters? Rush? Russell? Sohold?
Aye.
Solano? Stalzer? Sutton? Tapio? Tiedemann? White? Wick? Youngberg? Mr. President, there are 33 yeas, 2 excused.
Senate Bill 56 as amended, having received a 2/3 majority vote of the members elect, is hereby declared passed. Senator Wick, you have a title amendment marked 56 Sierra Tango Alpha. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
And do you move it at this time?
I wish to, yes.
Okay. All those in favor of that amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carried. But thank you, Senator Kennedy, too, because for people who are watching, the purpose of the amendment actually required a modification of what the definition is, that is the title of the bill, because this now includes eligibility income requirements to the bill, and so therefore the amendment to the title is also done. Next bill, please.
Senate Bill number 7, an act to revise certain provisions concerning campaign finance limits.
Senate Bill 7, having received a second reading, is up for consideration and final passage. Senator Youngberg, nice flowers there, bud.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 70 came out of our campaign finance summer, or the summer study on campaign finance. It was a cleanup bill. What we heard this summer was when people go to read these campaign finance, there's the transparency issue, all that. And the other thing they talked about was the clarity. It's very hard for people to read this. So what we did in Senate Bill 7, we cleaned up the language on it. It doesn't change the bill anyway. It just cleaned it up, made it more easier to read. So neutral. The Secretary of State's office was neutral on this bill, so I ask for your favorable vote on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Youngberg. Further remarks on Senate Bill 7? Hearing none, the question before the Senate is final passage of Senate Bill 7. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Bolin? Cronin? Kurd? Ewing? Frerichs? Greenfield? Haverly? Heinert? Jensen? Kennedy? Killer? Klum? Kolbeck? Langer? Maher? Monroe? Nelson? Nesseba? Netherton? Norstrup? Otten? Peters? Rush? Russell? Sohold?
Aye.
Solano? Stalzer? Sutton? Tapio? Tiedemann? White? Wick? Youngberg? Mr. President, there are 33 yeas, 2 excused.
Thank you. Senate Bill 7, having received a majority vote of the members elected, is hereby declared passed. Title questions? I'll approve the title then.
Senate Bill 8, an act to establish provisions as to how campaign contribution limits apply to certain aggregate contributions.
Thank you. Senate Bill 8, having received a second reading, is up for consideration and final passage. Good afternoon, Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill also comes from this summer's Government Accountability Task Force, which dealt with campaign finance issues. It's a bipartisan bill that came out of that committee, and it's fairly narrow in scope. What it does is it determines that for purposes of contribution limits for statewide legislative and county PAC and party contributions, all committees that are commonly controlled share the contribution limit for that particular race in aggregate. The goal of the bill is to prevent people or unions or companies, whatever, from setting up multiple committees in an attempt to make contributions that would evade the contribution limits established by those various statutes. So it's fairly narrow in scope. It really will only affect primarily PACs and ballot question committees. And again, the goal is to just make sure people can't evade the contribution limits by setting up multiple entities. So the Government Accountability Task Force would urge the adoption of Senate Bill 8. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Further remarks? Hearing none, the question before the Senate is final passage of Senate Bill 8. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Senator Bolin? Cronin? Kurd? Ewing? Frerichs? Greenfield? Haverly? Heinert? Jensen? Kennedy? Killer? Klum? Kolbeck? Langer? Maher? Monroe? Nelson? Nesseba? Netherton? Norstrup? Otten? Peters? Rush? Russell? Sohold? Solano? Stalzer? Sutton? Tapio? Tiedemann? White? Wick? And Youngberg. Mr. President, 33 yeas, 2 excused.
Thank you. Senate Bill 8, having received a majority vote of the members elected, is hereby declared passed. Title questions? I'll approve the title then. Thank you.
Senate Bill 10, an act to provide for the resolution of conflicts by multiple initiated measures and amendments to the Constitution adopted at the same election.
Senate Bill 10, having received a second reading, is up for consideration now and final passage. Senator Nesseba, welcome back, sir.
Glad to be back, Mr. President. This bill and the next two all came out of the Summer Task Force on Initiated Measures. And I always like it when my friend, the good senator from Canton, and I agree. I like it a lot better when he might even stand up and say a few kind words about this. When we pass a law out of our state house or our state senate, it's whatever bill passes last is what best reflects what we decide as a body. But if the people put two issues on the ballot at the same time and they both pass at the same time, what are we supposed to do? Right? So that's what this measure does, is it resolves that conflict and says that whichever measure gets more votes than the other, and just on the conflicting material, that the Code Council would weigh that and give weight to the initiated measure or the initiated amendment that received the most votes. So that's what it does. It's a bill looking forward to resolve a potential conflict between initiated measures or between initiated amendments at some future date.
Thank you, sir. Further remarks? Senator Bolin.
Thank you. I'll just take my friend up. The hour is late. Vote yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Further remarks? Hearing none, the question before the Senate is final passage of Senate Bill 10. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Madam Secretary, call the roll, please.
Senator Bolin. Aye. Cronin. Aye. Kurd. Aye. Ewing. Aye. Frerichs. Aye. Greenfield. Haverly. Aye. Heinert. Aye. Jensen. Aye. Kennedy. Aye. Killer. Aye. Klum. Aye. Kolbeck. Aye. Langer. Aye. Maher. Aye. Monroe. Aye. Nelson. Aye. Nesseba. Aye. Netherton. Aye. Norstrup. Otten. Aye. Peters. Aye. Rush. Aye. Russell. Aye. Soholt.
Aye.
Solano. Aye. Stalzer. Aye. Sutton. Aye. Tapio. Aye. Tiedemann. Aye. White. Aye. Wick. Aye. Youngberg. Aye. Norstrup. Mr. President, 33 yeas, 2 excused.
Thank you. Senate Bill 10, having received a majority vote of the members elect, is hereby declared passed. Any questions on the title? I'll approve it then.
Senate Bill number 11, an act to revise certain provisions regarding the time period during which petition sponsors may submit ballot measures to the Legislative Research Council for review and comment.
Senate Bill 11, having received a second reading, is up for consideration and final passage. Senator Nesseba.
Thank you, Mr. President. We spent a lot of time at the task force this summer trying to figure out. We talked a lot about out-of-state money and out-of-state petition circulators and whether there was pressure to be able to get petitions in ahead of time. As you know, if you're getting ready for the 2020 election, signatures are going to have to be in by November of 2019. And we had a lot of conversation about whether it was possible to push that deadline back to what it had been in the past, right? Many states allow people to keep circulating into April or May of the election year. In South Dakota, we cut that off a year ahead of time to allow plenty of conversation on that issue. What this bill does is say, okay, we're not willing to go any further that direction, but let's clarify when the starting point can begin. And the starting point would be 30 months before the election, which would mean if you want to get something ready for the 2020 ballot, what you need to be doing is beginning in May of this year, submitting your language. You could, beginning in May of this year, you could submit your language, and the LRC could respond to that. And the hope is that ballot committees will start the process earlier, and that would give them a full year to circulate, so that the time spent at the Secretary of State's office, with the AG's office, as well as with LRC, all of that can get done, and a group could begin circulating as soon as the day after the 2018 election, and give them 1 year before they have to get that in. So, thank you.
Thank you. Further remarks? Hearing none, the question before the Senate is final passage of Senate Bill 11. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Bolin. Cronin. Aye. Kurd. Aye. Ewing. Aye. Frerichs. Aye. Greenfield. Aye. Haverly. Aye. Heinert. Aye. Jensen. Aye. Kennedy. Aye. Killer. Aye. Klum. Kolbeck. Langer. Maher. Monroe. Nelson. Nesseba. Netherton. Norstrup. Otten. Peters. Rush. Russell. Soholt.
Aye.
Solano.
Aye.
Stalzer. Sutton. Tapio. Tiedemann. White. Wick. And Youngberg. Mr. President, there are 30 yeas, 3 nays, and 2 excused.
Senate Bill 11, having received a majority vote of the members elect, is hereby declared passed. Title questions? I'll approve the title then.
Senate Bill 12, an act to require petition circulators for certain ballot measures to make available the full text of the ballot measure to petition signers.
Senate Bill 12, having received a second reading, is up for consideration and final passage. Senator Nesebo, Groundhog Day.
Thank you, Mr. President. Current law says that the full text of the entire bill needs to be on the petition that is being circulated. And perhaps you've seen pictures, perhaps laying on your desk, of one of the petitions that came before our initiated measure summer committee. That particular bill, I think, had 42 different sections, and then it still had to have room on it to be able to gather signatures. And perhaps you've seen other people with longer bills that they end up getting folded in multiple ways, and they look like accordions. And what our summer study committee said, well, maybe we have this wrong. Maybe instead of putting the full text on the petition itself, maybe we should separate that out. On the petition, we would put the title and the Attorney General's statement and leave room for the signatures. This would be good for the ballot committees to make it easier to gather signatures. It would also make it easier for the Secretary of State to be able to process those. But then require that ballot question committees would make available the full text of that. So instead of asking, coming up and asking to read something off somebody's clipboard, you could say, well, here's the title, and here's the Attorney General's explanation, and here's the full text of the bill. If you want to read that before you sign that, go ahead. So I think the third benefit of this is that it's good for people to learn about the bill. They can read it before they have to sign it. So that's why it left our committee with, I don't remember the vote, but it was an overwhelming majority of support coming out of our summer committee, and I would urge your support. Thank you.
Senator Monroe, you have an amendment here marked 12 Whiskey Alpha. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. President.
Do you move it at this time?
It's getting late. What?
Do you move it at this time?
I would move Amendment 12W8 this time.
Is there
Mr.
a
Whiskey.
second? Comments on the motion to amend along with latitude to speak to the bill, sir?
Thank you, Mr. President. In line 14, I agree with the spirit of the bill completely. I think it's a good thing. And the only thing is that I can see a lot of ways that I have some sons that probably try to wiggle around this, leave it in their car, say, I'll get it for you later, but sign first, and I'll bring that back in an hour. So on line 14, instead of saying that shall provide or shall make available to each person, actually just change it to carry on the circulator's person. And this makes it so that if somebody is going to sign a petition, doesn't understand it, there will be no time delay in finding out. And it helps with a lot more transparency and information for the public and better voting, better things for our state. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further remarks on the motion to amend? Senator Nesseba.
Yeah, I agree with the good senator from Hughes, Hyde, Stanley, and Sully County that is our intention. It's only too bad that you weren't on our summer task force to tell us then. So thank you. I'd urge passage of the amendment.
Any further remarks on the motion to amend? Hearing none, all those in favor of Senator Monroe's motion to amend marked 12 Whiskey Alpha signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. No. Motion carried. Further remarks on Senate Bill 12 as amended? Senator Solano, welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. President. Question for the sponsor.
State your question, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. As amended, is there a requirement that a person carrying the petition must provide that copy or hand a copy of the proposed amendment to each person before they sign?
Senator Nessebar, do you care to answer the question?
I do. Thank you, Mr. President. Right now, what our requirement, so the short answer is yes, and we have that requirement now, but we do the opposite, right? At the moment, we have the full text of the bill on the petition itself, and we ask people to carry a piece of paper that has the title and the Attorney General's language. What we did with Initiative Measure 21 when we were circulating is we had pads of those available, and we handed those off to people. So if they were curious before they signed, or if they wanted to know what they signed, and on that also had, on that piece of paper, it also had just the information of who the sponsor was, and I put my phone number on there as treasurer of the committee, so if people had questions, they could simply call my cell phone.
Senator Solano.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for your answer. My concern in looking over this bill is I'll liken it to the bills that are passed around here. When we get signatures, we of course have the full bill that's attached to the signature page, and so my concern is that we end up creating a situation where that information is not readily available to those people signing beforehand. Having something that actually attached, maybe not written within the petition, but something attached, so it became very clear to a signer of a petition that this is what you're signing on for, would seem to me to maybe be a little more transparent to the folks that we're asking to sign petitions. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, sir. Does anybody wish to speak before Senator Nessebar speaks? Again, Senator Boland, thank you.
Well, thank you. And the intent of this particular bill, again, which came out of the task force, was to try to be a little more practical with the process. The bill states that you have to, make available to someone who requests it the entire title of the entire wording of the bill. So I would urge support of this as amended. I'll leave it at that.
Senator Nessebar.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. I agree completely with the good senator from Pennington County in terms of the value and his concern about that. And so we had a lot of conversation this summer about this issue of how do we best educate the voters about that. And the intention, I think, was good in terms of having the full text on there. But as somebody who's gathered hundreds of signatures, it's rare for somebody to say, oh, can you take that off your clipboard and let me read the entire thing? They just don't. It just doesn't happen practically. If you're at the Sidewalk Arts Festival in Sioux Falls, or you're at the State Fair, people come by and sign it. And I think we'd be far better off if people were walking away and were interested and to have available the full text of it. So I agree with your concern about transparency and people knowing what they're signing, and I think that was our concern as a committee as well. And so we were just trying to do this in the best way possible. So thank you. I urge support for the bill.
Thank you. Senator Tapio.
I have a question for the previous speaker.
Yes, sir. Please state your question, please.
Yes. IM 21 was a product from last year's referendum process, and I believe that it had multiple topics. Is that currently the law? Is that a referendum or an initiative process or even an amendment to the Constitution could have multiple topics, whereas in the legislative process, I believe we're stuck with just having one specific topic? Could you answer that question for me, sir?
Senator Nessebar, do you care to answer the question? Okay, he declines. Anybody else wish?
Mr. President.
Senator Tapio, you have the floor.
I'm wondering if there is interest in offering an amendment to make sure that the referendum process only looks at one particular issue. What happened in the last election was that we had multiple issues, one of which said that South Dakota would be the first state to publicly finance campaigns, indicating that there was a $50 credit which would go to, any particular person in the, that any citizen, voting citizen, could allocate their $50 credit to any candidate in the particular race. I find that quite troubling because these bills, these referendums get so large that as we're serving, having people sign these, they become more and more and more confusing. And I believe that we might even want to, as a body, look at maybe isolating that down. In particular, one of my constituents has gotten sucked into this payday loan issue, which was targeting consumer payday loans, and he is a lender that lends to businesses, and we're having a hard time trying to figure out how he can capture simple attorney's fees when his clients don't pay their bills. And so trying to figure out how to create legislation after these huge bills go through is really becoming a real headache in my district for one particular consumer. So I would I would suggest that the body looks at that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Further remarks on Senate Bill 12 as amended. Senator Boland.
No, thank you, and I just would ask us to focus fundamentally on this particular very limited small piece of proposed legislation that deals with the whether or not the actual full text should be attached to the petition or made available. And many of the concerns of the previous speaker, I think, are legitimate, but I don't believe they are very relevant to this exact piece of legislation. So I'd urge its support. Again, this was carefully and thoughtfully looked at over the summer. I think it is the most logical and the most practical way of handling the current situation, and urge support again. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody wish to speak before Senator Tapio speaks again? Okay, Senator Tapio, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I ask a question of the previous speaker?
Please state your question.
Did your task force look or try to address the concerns which I brought up in the previous
Senator Boland, do you care to
message?
answer the question?
I would say it was not that particular idea of the more than one topic in a proposal was not brought up greatly, because primarily the ability of the people, as far as initiated measures are concerned, to bring these things to the public for a public vote is very broad and expansive within the South Dakota Constitution. You can look on Article 3, Section 1, and I would encourage you to read that. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Tapio, anything further? Okay. Further remarks? Hearing none, the question before the Senate is final passage of Senate Bill 12 as amended. Those in favor of passage will vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Boland? Aye. Cronin? No. Kurd? Aye. Ewing? Aye. Frerichs? Aye. Greenfield? Aye. Haverly? Aye. Heinert? Aye. Jensen? Aye. Kennedy? Aye. Killer? Aye. Klum? No. Kolbeck? No. Langer? No. Maher? No. Monroe? Aye. Nelson? Yes. Nesseba? Aye. Netherton? Aye. Norstrup? No. Otten? Aye. Partridge excused. Peters? Rush? Aye. Russell? Aye. Sohold? No. Solano? Stalzer? Aye. Sutton? Aye. Tapio? No. Tiedemann? No. White? No. Wick? No. Youngberg? No. Healy James, no. Peters votes no. Nelson votes no. Motion to reconsider? Wait, just a second. Just a second.
reconsidering running for the Senate, or?
Senator Peters? Okay. And Senator Nelson? Mr. President, there are 18 yeas, 15.
Just a
nay-
second.
Did you give me a change, Monroe? Okay, sorry.
It was only his amendment.
There were too many people talking at one time here. Okay.
Okay, we'll call it again. Madam Secretary, please.
Okay, there are 17 yeas, 16 nays, and 2 excused.
Having failed to receive the majority vote of the members elect is hereby declared lost, and you're giving your notice of intent to reconsider. Is that correct? You're welcome. Okay, we'll proceed.
Senate Bill 58, an act to revise certain provisions regarding tax increment financing districts.
Thank you. Senate Bill 58, having received a second reading. Having received a second reading, is up for consideration and final passage. Are there any remarks? Senator Monroe, welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. President.
You have an amendment here too, sir? 58?
Yes, I do, Mr. President.
58 Alpha Alpha, is that correct?
That's correct.
And do you move it at this time?
I move that at this time, Mr. President.
Second, comments on the motion to amend as well as the bill. Hopefully, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. Time is getting late, so maybe we should just vote on it. This is a real good effort on the part of the administration, also the summer committee on workforce housing, building workforce. There are a couple types of TIFs. One is a local TIF, which means that when they give a tax break for a business to come in, basically the city eats the cost of that tax break until they start making their money and can pay taxes. The other one is the commercial one, or the one for economic development, and that's where the state absorbs the cost of the TIF, the tax break, until such time as they start paying taxes and the TIF runs out. So that's basically the long and short of it. What the bill does is it allows, right now, the law only allows for a local TIF, which means if a person wants to, because it's for residential, it's for housing. And so the only provision they have right now for housing is in a local TIF. What this does, it just makes it legal to have a commercial economic development TIF where they can, a developer or an entity can have a housing project for workforce development, workforce housing, and I'm going to go a long time here, Mr. President, so there are other people that I'm sure would like to speak briefly, but this just allows for that, and the amendment, all that does is it adjusts for the market forces rather than keeping the cost of a house that they can build late in the TIF at previous year's prices, and I can see that there are other people that like to say something, so let them go ahead. And thank you, Mr. President. I encourage you, yes, vote on the bill.
Thank you, sir. Senator White, you're granted permission to speak to the proposed amendment of the bill as well, sir.
All right, thank you, Mr. President. As we read through this bill, it was apparent that there is basically a lid on the value of the housing projects that you were going to be able to build over a period of the TIF, which was a 18 or 20 year period. And we could see, or I could see, that that was going to impact the ability to entice developers to become part of a project within your community. And so I did oppose that one little segment, stating that I didn't feel that that was going to enhance what we wanted to do with the TIF. And worked with the Powers and the good senator from Pierre and got this corrected, and so I am in complete agreement with the bill as it stands with the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Haverly.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to step back a little bit, so we all recognize that TIF, tax increment financing, is a public financing method that's used to help finance development projects. A portion of the taxes paid help finance the project for a certain period of time. So what does this particular bill address? TIFs were enacted in 1978, but there was really no comprehensive form and style revision over the years. The Department of Revenue also recently discovered that the classification process for TIFs and the state aid to education formula is inconsistent. The classification of a TIF has a significant impact on all property owners in the state, and it's imperative that the classification is uniform in accordance with the law. So what does this particular bill do? I know there's many pieces to it, but I want to speak specifically to the first five sections. At the direction of the governor, the Department of Revenue helped develop guidelines for TIF creation and classification to help mitigate some of these inconsistencies across the state. Senate Bill 1 will sunset the current 13-1310-2. That's the current state aid statute that governs how TIFs are treated in the state aid to education formula. This section of the law would remain in effect for any TIF that was created before July 1, 2018, recognizing we're going forward with the new classification. Section 2 restates the general rule for local TIFs, whereby local property owners must pay an additional property tax levy to make the impacted school districts whole. Section 3 provides exception to the general rule for the current industrial and economic development classification and what we're specifically talking about previously, and the new exception for affordable housing. Housing is an economic development position, and especially whenever we're trying to get workers here. Section 3 defines the economic development, industrial, and affordable housing for purposes of the state aid statute, and Section 5 gives the Department of Revenue the ability to publish an annual report of all TIFs in the state. Tax increment districts using this financing is one of the few economic development tools that local communities have. So I was very concerned whenever we first started talking about these revisions and Department of Revenue was going to issue some guidelines. I wanted to be extremely sure that local control was considered. The bill before you took into consideration concerns of local economic development offices, local chamber offices, our municipalities, and the state chamber, all working with the Department of Revenue. I'm very pleased with what we have before us, including the amendment. And so today I ask for you to support this classification or this clarification to a very important economic development tool.
Thank you, ma'am. Further remarks? Hearing none, the question, we have an amendment here before us moved by Senator Monroe marked 58 Alpha Alpha. Any further remarks on the motion to amend? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion to amend signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carried. 658 is so amended. Further remarks on Senate Bill 58 as amended? Hearing none, the question before the Senate is final passage of Senate Bill 58 as amended. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Senator Boland. Cronin. Kurd. Ewing. Frerichs. Greenfield. Haverly. Heinert. Jensen. Kennedy. Killer. Klum. Kolbeck. Langer. Maher. Monroe. Nelson. Nesseba. Netherton. Norstrup. Otten. Pardon? Otten. Partridge is excused. Peters? Rush? Russell? Sohold? Solano? Stalzer? Sutton? Tapio. Tiedemann. White. Wick. Youngberg. Nessebar. Okay. Mr. President, there are 33 yeas, 2 excused.
Senate Bill 58, as amended, having received a majority vote of the members elect, is hereby declared passed. Any title questions? The title's approved. Madam Secretary and members of the Senate, Senator Ewing pointed out to me that he had, and I do recall him voting no on Senate Bill 12. The recordation shows that it is no. So what we'll do, Boots, here is we'll make the Journal understand that that the vote needs to be corrected before you close it up. He actually did change his vote. I heard it. If anybody objects to that, then it would be a unanimous vote. Excuse me, it'd have to be unanimous vote to allow him to change it. Okay? So the record will reflect, our Journal, which is our record, I'm sorry I used that phrase, that Senator Ewing voted no on Senate Bill 12. Okay? And that obviously will be then your document you'll work off of Senator Nessebar on reconsideration. So here you go, Boots. Thanks. Thank you, Senator Ewing, for pointing that out. Okay, up to announcements now. Senator Wick.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Joint Committee on Appropriations meets tomorrow morning. Got some of the bigger agencies coming up. We have the Health Department. Then we're going to talk about correctional health and then corrections tomorrow morning starting at 8 a.m.
Thank you. Senator Heinert. Matakipi. Who's listening? Who's listening?
Well, Mitakepi, Mr. President, I have a personal privilege, please.
Yes, granted.
Well, thank you. And members of the body, I ask that you send my daughter the warmest regards on her 23rd birthday today. Now, there is a little caveat to it. She is in Edinburgh, Scotland at grad school. And right now, the local time in Edinburgh is about 11 p.m., so I'm sure she is sitting there listening to us, waiting for me to announce her birthday. So with that, baby girl, I love you and happy birthday.
How about a name?
Oh, my daughter Jordan. Thank you.
Okay, from now on, you'll be known as Jordan.
Yeah. I do have an announcement also.
Okay,
Mr. President.
please. Happy birthday, Jordan.
For there was a reception planned by the Yankton Sioux Tribe, Flandreau Sioux Tribe, and Crow Creek that has been postponed due to weather, so be watching your email for that date to be rescheduled. So, Pilamia, Apolo.
Pilamia. Senator Klum, happy birthday.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Ag tomorrow, 10 o'clock, we have 3 bills.
Senator Boland.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Education, 7:45 tomorrow. We have 4 bills up. Thank you.
Outstanding. Senator Langer. Nope. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just have a question for Senator Heinert.
Please state your question.
I wondered if he could explain why he has clogs on his desk.
Oh. He's Irish and he does dancing, right? I don't think they're clogs, are they, Senator Van Heinert?
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for the question. So one of our roommates decided to take it upon himself to include all of my heritage. So obviously, my mother is Dutch. If you've ever seen her, it's very evident. The good senator from Isabel decided that I should embrace all of my heritage. So, and I sure appreciate that with his resolution as well. Thank
That's really great. So you can reciprocate with Senator Maher and just buy him a mutt. Hi-yo! Ouch! Further announcement, Senator Maher. I am a mutt.
I know nothing.
Further announcements. Great day. Good working day. Please proceed.
Senator Klum moves that the Senate do now adjourn.
All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carried. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.